Great. First of all, I'm John Felix, the president of PHSNE, and I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, which I'm sure is going to be an extremely interesting program. We have had the last 2 months off. I won't say that was a complete vacation for a lot of us, especially people like Dana, who I want to begin by just thanking for all the work she has done and continues to do. And also to Ben for making all this possible electronically, which is a way beyond my pay grade. I don't get paid though anyway. So anyways, as we begin the new season, you know, I want to encourage you all to check out our website. We do some amazing things here at PHSNE. We have, I think, a fantastic journal. We have great programs, as you all know, and a lot of stuff that you maybe don't hear a whole lot about. We make dozens and dozens of donations to schools for equipment and other things. We provide advice. We have, again, a great website. We have a great photographic show. So I really encourage you to check out PHSNE and to let me know if you can help us in any ways, even just a couple of hours a week. We have a lot of activities going on, and I personally could really use the help. Just contact me directly at president@phsne.org. I think this is a fantastic way to start off a new season here with programs with Dr. McIntyre. If you had read her article in the 2021 journal on Miss Smith from the Lowell area, or certainly followed her podcast, you will realize that she's one of the foremost authorities on women photographers in the 18th century. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Dana to give you a bit more information about Lee. Dana?
Thank you, John. That was great to hear you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator for PHSNE. And before I introduce our speaker, Dr. Lee McIntyre, there are a few announcements. So the active screen is being recorded for YouTube. And if you're not familiar with Zoom, when you move your cursor or go down to the bottom of the screen, please stay on mute during the presentation. So your microphone should have a red line through it. You can turn your camera on and off with the movie camera icon. And in the center at the bottom is a chat balloon, a speech balloon. We're going to post some information in the chat. And I would ask that during the presentation, if you have questions, you submit them to the chat. And I will relay them to Lee either during or at the end of the presentation. And then if you have technical difficulties, please post those in the chat too, and we'll try and help you out. When you use the chat, please use the default everyone so we can all see it. And at the top right, when you mouse over, there's a view icon. Speaker view is best for this presentation. And then at the end, if you want to see everyone's face, you switch back to gallery. Okay, so our speaker tonight, Dr. Lee McIntyre, is an independent historian currently living in San Jose, California. Since earning her PhD in linguistics from the University of North Carolina, she's taught everything from linguistics at the university level to English as a second language in Japan to practical photography in Germany. Dr. McIntyre is also an award-winning software designer and a co-inventor of many US patents. One of her primary passions, though, is bringing the lives of early women photographers into the spotlight. And you have, of course, read the article in our New England Journal of Photography last year on Castilia Smith. And you can find many other women's stories on her podcast, Photographs, Pistols, and Parasols, which we'll post the link to in the chat so you can all visit the website. And it's also available at p3photographers.net, where there are images and other materials and also the blog. So we'll paste that info into the chat. And now I'd like to share the screen with Lee.
Thanks very much, Dana. And thank you everyone for joining today. I want to really thank Dana and John and all of PHSNE. It's been great planning for this event and also having a chance to publish that article in the journal last year. My husband also works with me on the research, Chris Cooley, and you'll see his name on the article. I'm going to be the voice of our project tonight, bringing you information that we research all the time on early women artisan photographers. So I'm going to explain that in just a second, but let me try to share my screen again. Please bear with me while I try this again. And hopefully Dana is at working. Okay, great. So calling this On the Trail of Early Women Artisan Photographers. Before I get to what artisan photographers mean, I do want to say that I planned this for the talk about the photographers that we work on, some of them from New England. I realized the map there actually has more than New England. I do understand that New York does not actually count as a New England state, but we were putting this together, realized that some of the women that we had picked out to spotlight tonight really actually cross the border. So they don't necessarily respect the New England boundary. So some of them work in New York. So that's why New York winds up as part of my New England map. So I hope you'll bear with this because I really want to spotlight these women from New England. Now, artisan photography, what is that? So this is the project that my husband and I have been working on to spotlight the women who are artisan photographers, the women taking portraits of people in a studio or taking pictures of groups. Like if we were all in one place and maybe a photographer would take a picture of that event. That's what an artisan photographer does. They take pictures of everyday lives. And there were a number of women doing this as well as men from the start of photography from 1840. And then the project that my husband and I have arbitrarily somewhat cut it off for the women who started their careers before 1930. Now, these images that you see here are samples of the kinds of changing traditions and aesthetics over the years between 1840 and 1930. Taste changed, technology changed, but the basic idea of the artisan photographer, taking a portrait of someone, taking a picture that was a memento that someone could share with their relatives. That's what the artisan photographer does. And there are women who do this all across New England, all across the US. But I want to spotlight one woman named Minnie Libby. She went by Miss Libby. That's how her photography studio was branded. She was in Norway, Maine, which was a small town, but she was very active for almost 50 years in Norway, Maine, starting in the late 1800s. It was great to see a lot of her work celebrated here with images that you can find that she produced in her studio, marked as Miss Libby. And looking around, we can find ads in newspapers. We found an article, actually, she was spotlighted and profiled in 1940 toward the end of her career in Life magazine. And so there's some great write-up about how she has documented the inhabitants of Norway, Maine, from the children that she first took pictures of to over time, those children grow up and they bring their children to get their picture taken at Miss Libby's studio. So it's really quite fun to see how Miss Libby grows as an artisan photographer. Now, the idea of the artisan photographer contrasts with the idea of the artistic photographer. The artistic photographer, artistic photography was something that started to develop in the late 1890s, early 1900s, became quite popular with a style of photography called pictorialism, which is a very romanticized type of, not the sort of straight up portrait, but maybe asking someone to portray a character from literature or from painting. So that style of romanticized artistic photography, that's somewhat different from the straight up photography that we talk about when we talk about artisan photographers. But it's hard to draw a strict line. I mean, Catherine Bingham, the one you see here, she was very active as an artistic photographer. Her work was celebrated. She won awards. She did shows, what are called salons of this artistic images, all in the early 20th century. The Camera Craft, where this image actually appeared, was a journal to celebrate the artistic photography. And ultimately, in the 19-teens, Catherine Bingham actually becomes one of the associate editors of this journal, in addition to winning awards and publishing her own work. Now, The thing is, though, we can't just say she was an artistic photographer because she was actually an artisan photographer as well. She had a studio, and she listed herself in the census and the directories as an artist and a photographer. And I have this clip from the St. Johnsbury Caledonian newspaper that talks about a group meeting, as I said, if we were all meeting in the same place, but then the group went over to Catherine Bingham's studio and had a group picture taken. Now, they probably weren't dressing up as a character like we saw in that last photo. They're probably just taking a picture to memorialize the occasion. And that's the artisan side of Catherine Bingham's work. So you can't really draw a straight line to say some women are on the artist and some are on the artisan side. But for the rest of this talk, I'm going to be concentrating on women whose artisan work we're going to celebrate, because that often gets overlooked when people talk about photography of the early period. Talking about the artistic side is great, but I also want to talk about and celebrate these everyday women, like Costelia Smith in the article that my husband and I wrote. Now, in this talk, just so you'll notice, the little timeline you see there is actually what my husband and I refer to as a lifeline. We put these together to indicate the birth and death dates of the women that we're talking about, but also the orange little area shows you how long they were active doing photography. Some of them, like Miss Libby, who we see here, she was active for almost 50 years. Some people had a much shorter active life as a photographer, but we celebrate them all when we're looking at people for our project. And then I've also included a little indication of where each one of them was located. As I said, we'll get to a couple that actually crossed the boundaries out of New England and went into New York. The other thing I just want to mention is that what I want to talk about tonight is how we go about gathering the information about these women and how wonderful it is that there are so many materials that are available online these days, so that, you know, although I so want everyone to support the archives and the Historical Society locations, you can actually, like during the pandemic, for example, when we couldn't go to any archives, you could actually get all this information online. So we'll talk about how piecing together bits and pieces of different kinds of information, we're able to get a portrait of a woman, of her life and her career. All right, so the first one I want to talk about here is a woman named M. Frank Kimball. Now, Frank Kimball was a sister of two brothers who were very active as photographers. They initially had a studio in Lowell, Massachusetts, which was called the Kimball's Brother Studio. She worked for them, and then when they decided to move to a different town in Massachusetts, she rebranded the studio as just the Kimball's Photograph Studio and ran that studio in Lowell on her own. Now, I indicated here a couple of things. These artisan women are going to take out ads in newspapers, or as we see here in the Lowell City Directory in the lower left. In the directories themselves, if you've never looked in these city directories, you have a people part of the city directory and the business part of the city directory where photographers are listed. And you see that M. Frank Kimball lists herself as a photographer in the residence listing, but then also in the photographer's list. So if someone's looking for a photographer, they're going to be able to find her there. Now, over a period of time, she opens her studio by herself in the late 1870s. But then in the early 1880s, she actually gets married to a man who goes by the last name of Southard. And you start to see the Kimball's Photograph Art Studio have the proprietors are now not just M. Frank Kimball, but W.H. and M.F. Southard, so the husband and wife. Now, it's interesting when we dive into the other information we can find about this couple to note that, well, first thing is the name. You can find marriage records online fairly easily. And we discovered that Mary Kimball actually marries a man named W.H. Phillips. And looking in the newspapers, we discovered that W.H. Phillips was actually an actor. He wasn't a photographer, even though he's listed as a proprietor of the Kimball's Art, the co-proprietor. And so really, Mary Kimball is married to a man named Phillips, but publicly he goes by Southard, that's his stage name. And when you look in the newspapers, you can see a couple different things. One is that he's not really running the studio, at least it doesn't seem like he is, because he's still traveling with his touring company, his stage company. He's also not very well respected in Lowell. At one point, the article refers to him as a drunkard. So I don't know that he was particularly well liked, although she was popular, her studio was popular. But I do want to point out that even after she gets married, she keeps the brand. And this is, a very modern idea of, brand ideas, that the importance of a brand. I mean, we talk about that with entrepreneurs today, that when people have the name recognition of a brand, you keep that. And so Frank Kimball kept that even after she got married to a man named Phillips, who publicly went by the last name Southard. Now, Frank Kimball is contemporary of Castelia Smith, the woman who, as Dana and John referenced, that article in the journal is about. And I'm not going to talk a lot about Castelia Smith because there's a lot of detail in that journal article. But I do want to point out that Castelia was really prominent in that. Interestingly, she didn't actually use her first name in her marketing. Her brand was Miss C. Smith, or later Miss C.D. Smith. And she actually was able to run the studio on her own for a number of decades. And along the way, at some points in her career, she actually had 2 different locations that she was managing to leverage in Lowell, 2 different studio locations. And it was interesting, if you look at the pink card, the back of the card there, that's in French. So she was seemingly opening up a second location that maybe catered to the French-speaking population in Lowell. So uncovering these things really starts to point to some of what was going on in Lowell and leads you to researching things that were in the contemporary life of Castelia Smith. Now, one thing that when you're doing this kind of research with online materials, or if you're doing it in person, is the census records are really a valuable place to start when you're trying to locate people historically. And I bring up M. Frank Kimball and Castelia Smith here in 1880, and this is talked about in the article, that the puzzling thing is that in the 1880 census, neither Frank Kimball nor Castelia Smith are listed in the list of people living in Lowell. But we know from the directories that they actually are active running their studios in Lowell. The other puzzling thing was that the census taker apparently wrote things down so incorrectly that she locates someone at 112 Merrimack as being a photographer, which is true, that's M. Frank Kimball, but she calls it Catherine Smith, or the census taker, male or female, I'm not sure. They call it Catherine Smith. Catherine Smith is actually not a photographer who is ever active in Lowell. It's really quite puzzling. So it's one of those problems when you're dealing with the census records. You need to make sure that, okay, if someone isn't in the census and you think they should have been, it could be for a number of reasons. It could be that they just weren't in town the day the census taker came to call, or there was just a glitch in the person who's actually taking the census and writing it down. So you don't know. So you can't say for sure, if you don't find them in the census, that they weren't actually in that location at that time. You need to check it with, against other available sources like a local directory. The other thing to mention about the censuses in terms of doing historical research, particularly for women, is that it is very sad for me that the 1890 census, the federal census in the US, was actually lost in a fire at the Smithsonian. So there's no records, or very few records, from 1890 census. So when you're looking for women who are photographers, a lot of them would have been in the 1890 census, because that was a really active period for women to be running studios. So it can get very frustrating when you can't find the 1890 census. The other thing to note is that if you're looking for women, they didn't start recording women's, well, they started recording their names sooner, but in 1860 is when they really started regularly putting down the women's occupation. Before that, it was only a men's occupation. So just some things to think about when you're looking for women in the 1800s. Now, one thing I did want to call out about Castelia Smith for this particular artifact that we found is just to remind you that when you're looking for online resources, sometimes your best bet is just to do an internet search like you would search for anything else. Because when I did a search for the Marston building to see what was going on when Miss C. Smith moves her studio from the original location to the Marston building, I discovered that the Marston building was this big, fancy office building that opened in 1890. And it turned out there was this souvenir program from the city of Lowell that was produced to celebrate the opening of this building. And one thing that I hadn't gotten from any other description of Miss C. Smith's studio is the notion that she actually paid to have her name on the side of the building. And I love that we could see it in this beautiful engraving. So I really encourage you to, if you're looking online, just sometimes doing an internet search may reveal something unexpected. Now, Miss C. Smith and Frank Kimball, Minnie Libby, they're basically running these studios on their own. They don't have a business partner. Now, arguably, maybe Frank Kimball does with her husband, but according to the papers, he was not exactly a good business partner. So he probably didn't have a lot to do with the business. But I wanted to just point out, so John wrote a great article a few years ago in the journal on the Town family, the Wing family, and the complicated relationship between all the members of that family. Two of the people who John talks about in that article are Annie Wing Town and Emma Whitney. One thing that's striking for Annie Wing Town and Emma Whitney is that they partnered together for a long time, very successfully in Gardner, Massachusetts. They were not related, but Annie Wing Town had been married to a photographer named Willis Town. And again, this is all detailed in John's article. So Annie Wing Town is married to Willis Town. As far as we can tell, she probably wasn't working with Willis in the studio, but after they break up, Annie Wing Town actually goes off to Athol, opens up her own studio, which you can see on the left, and then she partners with Emma Whitney. So two women partnering together, just like two men partnering together, was another possible business model. But the interesting thing that I've found over the years when I talk to people about these early women photographers, sure. Oh, is there a question? Okay. So the interesting thing, when I talk to people about these early women photographers, I run across what I want to call a myth or a trope that, well, didn't it take a man or a male photographer to make sure that a studio was successful? And hopefully you can see that there are a lot of examples where that isn't the case. There's also sort of a related trope that, well, if a woman was successful, she was probably married to a male photographer, and maybe they ran the studio together, but it was really the man who was the photographer. And one of the women who both fits that myth and then also shows that it was possible to have a very strong woman photographer as part of that husband and wife pair is another woman that John profiles, who is Clara Obertown. Now, as I said, Annie Wing Town was Willis Town's first wife. Willis Town was a prominent photographer in Boston, running the Town studio. After he and Anna break up, he joins with Clara Ober, who is a photographer, and together, after they got married, they run the Town studio together, and she changed her name to Clara Obertown. Now, again, I refer you to John's wonderful article about them and the ins and outs of their relationships. But one thing that's great to note about Clara Obertown is that all the photographers, male and women, were doing some level of advertising for their studio. If you're an artisan photographer, you want to let people know that you're here. But Clara Obertown, to me, always takes it to that next level. So if you look over toward the right of the screen where it says, "A good fat baby, give it away, April 19th." Now imagine, it's 1894 and you're reading your newspaper one morning, you open your paper and there you see "A good fat baby given away, April 19th. That's going to make it look twice. Now, if you look at the fine print, she's not actually giving away a real baby. And on the left-hand side, I have another one of her ads, which is very similar in terms of the trick of how it's laid out. The cabinet photographs are not actually free, but the fun part of Clara Ober is that she really knew how to do these eye-catching ads. One of the things that can be frustrating about Clara Obertown, though, is that because both she and Willis were photographers at the Town portrait studio, since they ran it together, it's hard to know exactly which photos Clara Overtown took. But I included this picture here. It's of a woman named Annie Londonderry. Now, Annie Londonderry set out to do the first to be the first woman to bike around the world. Clara Overtown actually sponsors a send-off celebration for her at the start of her journey. It's celebrated in Boston, and then this is covered in the newspaper. Again, I think Clara Overtown was very astute at getting publicity. And so she gets the publicity, and in the write-up, it says that at the end of the celebratory send-off, Annie Londonderry wheels her bike down to the town portrait studio where Clara Overtown takes her picture. And so this is a picture of Annie Londonderry that I believe Clara Overtown took. So in that trope, if you will, of the husbands and wives running a studio together, there is this myth that the woman wasn't that strong. And I just said, you know, Clara Overtown clearly is a very strong partner in that partnership of the town studio. Another woman who fits part of a related part of the trope is that the idea is that a wife takes over when her husband gets sick or dies, the husband being a photographer, and the wife just takes over for a brief time in order to settle the debts and things. So Emily Gay, on the surface, it seems like her story starts in that kind of way because her husband, Edwin, opens the Gay's Gallery of Art. And we see an ad for it there. So the Gay's Gallery of Art in Fall River, Massachusetts, was building a successful following when Edwin gets sick. And so Mrs. E.F. Gay, Emily, she takes over and runs the Gay's Art Gallery. And so, you know, you might think that, okay, that's a very simple story. He got sick, he passes away ultimately, and she takes over for a time. One of the striking things, though, is that she takes over in the late 1870s, and she doesn't retire until 1920s. So she is successfully running the studio for almost 50 years. It's incredible. And so she does it mostly without Edwin because he does die in 1879. Now, when you look in the directories and you look in the obituaries and find information about his death, looking in the newspapers actually uncovers sometimes unusual or unexpected information. And that certainly was the case with the Gays. So what we discovered in 1879 is that it wasn't just that he got sick. He maybe went a little nuts. He shot Emily Gay's brother. He abducted their youngest daughter and then fled to Canada where he was from. Through this all, Emily Gay is continually running this Gay's Art Gallery. A few months pass and Edwin actually dies in Canada of consumption. That's what he had originally been sick with when he stopped running the gallery. But you know, this is sort of a dramatic turn of events that you don't expect. But if you take advantage of the fact that a lot of newspapers have been digitized these days, you can really, as I said, start to piece together not just aspects of the careers of these women, but also aspects of the lives and what was going on. And some of the hardships that they faced, certainly having to deal with the stress of her estranged ex-husband, her estranged husband actually kidnapping their child and shooting her brother. Another thing about married women is that the thought is that women who get married, unless they marry a photographer, they give up photography. And I just wanted to use Emily Stokes as an example of a married woman who actually runs a studio for a number of years. She's married, but not to a photographer. She's still happily married, but she doesn't give up photography when she gets married. She actually continues to do it. And her studio is always branded Mrs. Emily Stokes. And one of the things that I want to point out about these early photographic artisan women, that they were able to understand that advertising and targeting ads at different groups of potential customers was going to be very beneficial. Again, very astute businesswomen. And so Mrs. Emily Stokes here we see on the left has figured out that targeting that or a potential target group for her photographs would be the students at Wellesley College. So she takes out ads in the Wellesley College yearbook to advertise the fact that she's here. If you want to get your picture taken, come and get a beautiful portrait done when you graduate. The thing about Emily Stokes, though, that was really intriguing when we found this thing about Emily Stokes was to understand that actually she gets mentioned in the paper for a lot of different charity events, but then also things related to her photography. So there was one really sweet story in the paper in 1902 about how, with her connections with the Wellesley College students, the college students got together and decided to chip in to buy a new dog for one of their fellow students whose dog had died. And so there's a big party where they present the dog to the students or the new owner of the dog. And then they go down to Mrs. Emily Stokes' studio to have a picture taken of the dog with the new owner. What was fun to realize that was actually talking about Helen Keller, and a very famous picture of her with one of her dogs, who is Sir Tom initially, but then she refers to him as Fizz in her autobiography. It's actually her favorite dog, according to her autobiography. So what's fun is to realize that photos that you might have seen, and this is certainly a very famous picture of Helen Keller with one of her dogs, this was actually taken by one of these early women artisan photographers. There are other women who take pictures of famous people, and we ran across this picture of Robert Frost, which is identified as being taken by Julia Eden. And then looking into Julia Eden's story, well, it turns out that she and her sister opened a studio called the Mrs. Eden, the MISSES Eden, which is how a lot of sisters would open studios and call themselves the Mrs. X. Unfortunately, Myra, one of the sisters, dies fairly shortly after they open the studio, but Julia continues on for quite a while. And along the way, she actually takes this picture of Robert Frost, which was one of his favorite pictures, which was used a lot for publicity on his early books of poems. I think at least 3 of the books of poetry actually used this picture for the publicity. So again, kind of fun to realize, that there are these women photographers who were known in their own, or noted in their own time, for taking great non-artistic artisan photos. All right, so doing the research, again, with a lot of the material online, it's possible to reconstruct a lot about the lives of women, but then sometimes you run into some challenges. So this photograph, this beautiful carte de visite from the Civil War period, on the back, it says photographed by Mr. and Mrs. H.B. Cady. So when my husband and I bought this, we're like, oh, okay, well, we know the name, that here's a women photographer, right? But the thing is that we can't find any other information about Mrs. Cady as a photographer, not in the censuses, not in the directories. I think the directories actually weren't online. So the one thing I did find from Waitsfield, Vermont, was a genealogy of the people in town put together in the 1800s. And we can see that Henry B. Cady is a photographer. It says he married Laura Sterling, but then when we found their marriage record over on the right, her name wasn't Laura, it was Livonia. Again, I think it's just some confusion of the names. We found more indications of variations on something that was probably more like Livonia in the censuses, but in the censuses that we found, we never actually found Mrs. Cady as a photographer. So it's puzzling. I mean, it's clearly she was something to do with this studio, but it's just never acknowledged in any other record that we've been able to find. Similarly, we found this reference to this great thing in the New York Tribune that Mrs. Stella Clapp in 1907 climbed to the top of a 175-foot smokestack on a factory in order to take photographs. Now, we should think about that for a second. 175 feet. She's climbing in 1907. I don't know that it would have been possible for her to wear climbing clothes in 1907. And what kind of camera did she carry up to the top of that smokestack? She didn't have an iPhone in her pocket. So, I mean, it's amazing, right? Mrs. Stella Clapp, we see in the censuses that she's married to Ralph Clapp. But again, she's rarely referred to as a photographer in any of the the possible sources that we find online. There's just this one intriguing mention in the newspaper. Now, in the 1910 federal census from Athol, we see that Ralph is the photographer and Stella is listed as the assistant photographer in the studio. But by 1920, she no longer has any kind of outside occupation. And there's a woman living with them, a woman named Hazel, who she is listed as the assistant photographer. And so sometimes when you're digging into the records, you can actually uncover not necessarily scandals, but something that's a little bit intriguing, because by 1930, Ralph and Hazel had actually run off, and they opened up a studio all over the place in other towns. Stella dies in 1934, and after that, Ralph and Hazel actually get married. So it's just intriguing, what this little mention of Stella climbing the smokestack uncovered. It's not what we expected, though. We thought there'd be more about her amazing exploits. Now, there's the type of thing where it's hard to find any information, but then with a woman named Adi Gendron, we ultimately found a lot of information about a lot of different places that she was. Now, she's one of the ones who worked in New York, which extended New England for this talk to New York, but she's actually active in Rhode Island, and we'll see in a second, she's active in Massachusetts. The puzzling thing about someone like Adi Gendron is that our first introduction to her was by buying that photograph that's down in the lower right, where she's in Westerly, Rhode Island. But when we look in the censuses, we can't actually find any evidence for her in any federal census, and those federal censuses are every 10 years. We did find one mention of her in the Rhode Island census, but the puzzling thing is that she actually then drops from sight from Rhode Island. So we're like, what happened to her? So after digging around, we discovered that she was in Watertown, New York. And then in the newspaper, we see that she's won the lottery, and she's decided to go off to Boston to open a studio in Boston after she wins the lottery. So then we find her in Boston. So we can track her, but it took some work to really go from being that one photo from Westerly, Rhode Island, to actually understanding that women were very mobile, and a woman, particularly with some money, could actually go where she wanted and open up a studio wherever she wanted. So Harriet Lewis Scudder, rather, she's another one who is a little bit more mobile, kind of like Miss C. Smith. She actually runs two studios at once. So her main studio is in Broadway in New York City, but then she opens up another studio in Indian Harbor Hotel in Greenwich, Connecticut. She's actually more from Connecticut. Now, she always does business. Her studio is always branded Mrs. J.B. Lewis, even after she marries a man named Scudder. So even when she's Mrs. Scudder in the social notices, does her studio business is always Mrs. J.B. Lewis. So again, that really savvy businesswoman mentality to make sure that the understanding that the brand was very important. One of the really things that I wanted to point out, and I included her, is that for Mrs. J.B. Lewis, in addition to finding information about sort of where she died, and obituaries are always a great thing to find, and where people are buried are always interesting because you can track their relatives and things like that. But the thing we found for Mrs. Lewis was actually probate records, which were available online in Connecticut. Now, when she dies in 1883, she leaves one of those studios to her husband, Mr. Scudder, who was not necessarily a photographer. But what that means when she leaves him the studio business is that the probate records actually have an inventory of what was in the studio. So we can see information about the reception room, what was in the reception room. We can see information about the backdrops that she had available. There was a snow scene. There was a regular room scene. So people could have their pictures taken in all these different scenes. So it's just fascinating to be able to locate these probate records to give you a sense of not just the time and the how much money they were making, but also a little bit about the business and when it's mentioned in the probate record. All right, so this is a really quick look at a bunch of different women from New England. I really wanted to emphasize that it's possible to find so many different pieces of information that there's just so much available online these days that is really fascinating. as I said, mostly my husband and I look at the artisan women. And I've included 2 women here connected with Massachusetts, the Allen sisters. Again, when I talk to people about early women photographers from New England, they often bring up the Allen sisters because they are famous and they've been written up a bunch. They are usually termed artistic photographers, and their obituaries actually describe them as amateur photographers. Now, I think like Catherine Bingham, that actually is selling them a little bit short because they actually did sell other images, not just their artistic work that they exhibited and won prizes for, but they did pictures of Deerfield, Massachusetts, where they live, and they sold them to like the Housekeeping magazine. They sold images to books that were about Deerfield. So they were actually making money, not just doing their artistic photography. So I included them here just so you can see that they're contemporary with all these women that I've been talking about today. And then I provided this slide with a list of, again, all those types of art, different pieces of information and that you can find online. But then here are some of the online sites I've used. Now, I don't have any affiliation or make any money from sending people to these places. These really are just very useful pieces, places to look at to see what you can find about these women. As I said, when you're looking at these women, checking, just doing an internet search, but also like looking at some of these sites that have the newspapers, that have the obituaries, that have other pieces of information about their lives, about their careers, it can really give you a sense of the women that you're talking about, even if you're looking at women who lived in the 1800s or the early 1900s, like the Photographs, Pistols, and Pyrosols project that my husband and I work on. Thanks. That's it. That was quick. That's it.
Thank you, Lee. That was wonderful. If everybody wants to unmute, please feel free to give Lee a round of applause.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great job, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention a few things before we get to questions. The active charts with the birth, death dates, and the years that the photographers were active is fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
And
thanks. And I want to call out my husband because he makes tools that put those things together, those visualizations, both the maps and the lifelines. So
yes, thank you, Chris. Those are amazing. And the resources at the end, I pasted into the chat. If you scroll up to the top, the links to the PDFs of the presentation, so you can see all of those resources that Lee mentioned at the end, like Ancestry and things you can use to do your own research. And city directories, all those things are great for tracing the different names that the studios might have. And it's hard to do that without those resources. So that was wonderful. And there is one question from Larry Woods about Emily Stokes' Wesley College yearbook ad, the same attention given to classwork as to regular. Is that the student photos are given the same attention as a regular patron would be?
that's my assumption that what that would mean, that she's taking pictures and the women would come in, and we've seen various copies of women getting their picture taken, like when they're graduating from college, Emily Stokes and some other women, other photographers as well. And they would come in like in similar kinds of outfits. And I think that there was probably, maybe they were offered cheaper for the students with a discount or something. But yeah, she's got to do the same high quality work on the student work, even if it's at a discount that she would for anybody coming into the studio.
And just kudos from Ben.
No.
Who's Ben saying kudos, thank you. It's amazing presentation and tribute to the work of these women. And I agree.
Thanks.
The podcast I want to recommend to everyone. It's fantastic and addictive.
How do we get
The podcast,
picture up here?
Kathleen, is that you asking a question? The podcast is it's p3photographers.net. And that is also in the chat. You can see that link in the chat. And that is an archive of all the podcast episodes. On the right, you'll see a list of all the women photographers who are mentioned. So please visit the page. It's really wonderful and represents a lot of work that we've done over the years.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks. And you actually will hear John. So he was kind enough, before he actually published that article in the journal, he was kind enough to be a guest on the podcast when I was talking about the towns. So that's actually how I met John. So I encourage you to, mostly it's just me talking, but I do occasionally have guests like John.
Thank you. Yeah, Lee, you mentioned Mrs. Caddy.
Yes.
What was her husband's name? It wasn't Wesley, was it?
No, it's Henry.
Henry, because
Henry B.
There was a caddy, I think it was Wesley Caddy, active in Springfield, Vermont.
Oh, really?
And then they moved he moved anyways to the Holyoke, East Hampton area. So that might be a connection.
Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, I think that yeah, they're voting Caddy, but it was Mrs. H.B. Caddy, is Mr. and Mrs. H.B. Caddy or Henry Caddy. So we'll check into that because it was so puzzling. She was one of the ones that, it's like, there's got to be information out there, but we've tried so many different tricks to find out.
I got that information, by the way, from Ron Polito's and Chris Steele's book, actually Massachusetts Photographers.
Oh yeah, another great resource. And actually that's available online now. So I should have included that in my online listings because, but I actually do have the physical book that we've referenced quite a bit, because this is a marvelous resource for Massachusetts directory for women, any men and women photographers who were active before 1900.
Amen.
Does someone have a question?
Yeah.
I just had a comment, if I might. On the references that you used, when you, if anybody is a Massachusetts resident, with a library card, they can join the Boston Public Library, and they have newspaper archives online for free. They have a lot of historical newspapers. They have Chronicling America, they have the New York Times, and a number of other newspapers, and they're all free. So if you once you sign up for the electronic archives, you can get a lot of resources for free that you might have to pay for otherwise.
That's right. That's a great point. Check with the library wherever you are, because your library might have definitely some accounts that you can access for free through these sources. I know that's true in the Connecticut library where my in-laws live. It's possible to do it from their library as well. It's a great point. Thanks.
I'm a librarian, and I can say that BPL has an e-card where you can sign up for free, even if you don't have to go in person. You can sign up online and get access to all of those newspapers that they offer.
That's great. So, and there are sites with other like Massachusetts Massachusetts newspapers as well that I didn't list here, that we have been able to access some Massachusetts papers through that. So yeah, so take a look around.
Lee?
Yeah.
I have a question. I enjoy your presentation very much.
Thank you.
I just have a question. In your work, you have photography, parasols. Where's the pistols come in?
Well, I should tell you to go to the website. So there is a reason I named it Photographs, Pistols, and Parasols. There is a woman who's the story, she's from California, about her packing a pistol when she those traveling photography studio rather. So there was a reason for that. That was very early on. That was a story that I got originally pointed out by the work by Peter Palmquist. So if you have never looked in any of Peter Palmquist's books, I really encourage you to take a look for work by Peter Palmquist, because he amassed a database of I think about 20,000
Yes.
women who were active in photography. My husband and I have been actively pursuing, try to piece together more information. We have our database is about 2,000 women, so just a fraction of what Peter was able to put together. He was amazing because he did it all before it was electronic, before it was digitized. He was going and using the microfilm readers stuff, but that parasols story, I'm sorry, the pistol story comes from there. The parasols as well, it actually is a connection to a photographer. Again, it was something that Peter Palmquist had found, where a photographer talks about the importance of a woman having a cane-handled linen parasol. So please do take a look at the website, and you should find the stories about Mary Winslow is the photographer with the pistol. Elizabeth Withington is the photographer with the parasol story.
Thank you.
Sure, and I should say that the website has the audio of the podcast episodes. It also has transcripts of all the podcast episodes as well. You can find the podcast on most of the major podcast directories. But if you want to just read the transcript and see the photos, examples, and the articles, the examples of the ads, that's on the website.
Lee?
Yeah.
This has nothing really to do with the New England photographers.
Mhm.
I didn't know if you knew about Sarah Auckland. I don't know if this is on the, you can see this picture. First woman of photography, it's a book, color photography.
The color for that, yeah. I just so I can't see who actually is talking, but I know that somebody has just sent me an email about that this week. I'm familiar with that book, and there are several other women who experiment with early color photography as well. At the moment, I've been focused more on North American women. So Sarah Auckland is from the UK. There are some women from Europe that I'm really hoping I can get to talk about as well. Because Sarah Auckland, I mean, I was just blown away when I saw that book and how much she did with early color photography.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Lee, this is Reichland here at PHSNE. I have a couple of 3 questions for you.
Sure.
Well, one is, thank you very much. You've done this fabulous kickoff for this year's set of meetings. I'm the webmaster for the PHSNE website.
Okay.
And I sent around all those emails too. So one of the questions that I'm interested in is, there are some women photographers, and I'm thinking of Shansanetta Stanley Emmons in particular, who were both commercial photographers, but also, if you will, artisan photographers, but also artistic. Does she fit into your what I think of as I'm trying to figure out the right word to describe it. Is she a transition between those 2 styles of work?
I don't know if she's transitioned. She is definitely an example of someone who straddled both worlds. She's fascinating, and there's been a lot written about her. And I think that when I first started this, my goal was to find the women who hadn't been written about at all. But I think that the more I dive into this, and having uncovered, so Catherine Bingham is one of the recent discoveries that we ran across. And I think what we're realizing is that, thinking that there was the commercial side and the people who focused on the artistic side, it really isn't a line that can be easily drawn. And I think that, Shansanetta Emmons is really fascinating. She actually, like Frank Kimball, starts learning photography by working for her brothers, who are famous photographers, among other things. And certainly her story is very fascinating. There are other women, Frances Fenton Johnson in DC. She didn't really, well, I think she experimented with artistic photography, the pictorialist style, but her work was really a lot more on the artisan side, but she promoted a lot of women in the early 20th century, women who did this kind of artisan style, as well as women who did the artistic style. So there's really a lot of crossover here, and figuring out exactly how to encompass it all. I mean, Peter Palmquist was the one who seemed to encompass everyone, and I'm still struggling on how we're going to fit everyone in. But definitely, she definitely is somebody that is worthy of, if you haven't ever run across her, please go look her up too.
Super. I'm also mindful to the rest of the audience that we actually just got a note, literally, I think Friday, from the Peter Palmquist Foundation or whatever it's called. And they're looking there once again, because it's as they do every year, for research proposals for photography, primarily out west. And I know that you are out there as well.
Yes.
Have you ever asked for some support from the Palmquist group?
So that is actually something that's on our list to look at. The deadline, I think, is next month. Definitely. So Peter's widow, Pam, has been very generous with her time. Several years ago, when we were just, my husband and I had an opportunity to wander around going to archives. This is pre-pandemic, and Pam was very generous at giving us some of Peter's books. And also we got permission to take a copy of his 20,000 name database, which we actually travel with us on our cell phones these days, so we can look at it if we run across something for sale. So yes, that is definitely something I think they're very supportive of people doing research on women photographers, and it's definitely something that we'll be looking into this year.
Last question, is there, have you ever contacted the folks up in Canada? I'm thinking of Photographic Canadiana and also the now renamed, it used to be the Ryerson Image Center, and it's now called the Image Center up in Toronto.
Yes. There is a collection, and that's where the Bernice Abbott collection wound up. And if you're not familiar with Bernice
That's
Abbott,
the one I'm looking at.
yeah. So she is one of my favorite photographers, and
right, we have a lot to talk about.
yeah, she, yeah. So definitely send me an email because we can talk. So I've never been there, but there's a lot that I have that I would love to say. What I haven't put on the podcast yet is someone like Bernice Abbott, because she really straddles a lot of different worlds with the taking portraits of people, but they were artistic, but of a different fashion, and also having all of her scientific photos toward the end, her documentation of New York in the 1930s. There's just a lot to talk about her.
There sure is. I'm gonna send you an email. Thank you.
Okay, sounds great. Sounds great. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I actually happened to see in the chat that there's a question about Emily Gay and the connection to Falls River and Lizzie Borden. So I don't know if someone was eagle-eyed to spot in that the name of the brother who got shot, but Emily Gay was actually a Borden. She was distant relation to Lizzie Borden. And I have seen a reference that there is a photo by the Gay studio, which would have been Emily Gay, of Lizzie Borden, but I have yet to track it down. So if anyone on this call has any connections to the people in Fall River, I would love to get a hold of that to know if that's true, because I have seen reference about that, but I haven't been able to track it down.
That would be amazing. And
yeah,
if anyone has suggestions of women photographers they would like looked into, or has a photograph that they're curious about the photographer, please contact Lee.
Yes, and please contact me with questions, with suggestions. Yeah, I would love to hear from you.
Laura has just sent a message saying that they just wrote an article for Canada's History Mag, who started their careers before 1967, and it is online. Laura, you can certainly paste that link into the chat. We would love that.
Yes, please do. That would be great. Because I love to find out names of these women and more about them. And just about Canada, I actually do have on the podcast about a couple of women from Canada. A woman named Hannah Maynard. She actually opened up a studio in Victoria, Canada in the 1850s. So she ran that for a long time. Her husband ran a shoe salesman, and then he actually learned photography from his wife, and in a way that I feel is very unfair. He actually is more well known than she is, but she was running the studio. She was experimenting. She did some fabulous experimentation for us. So if you look for Hannah Maynard on the podcast, there's a link to the book that someone wrote about her about 20 years ago about her work. Fabulous book, and also some fabulous photography.
There's a little background noise. If you're not asking a question, maybe mute your screen just a bit. How are we doing for time, Ben?
I think we're doing well. It seems like we fit in a lot of questions, and certainly if anybody has any other business to bring up now would be a good time for it. But I think it's also a great time probably to give Leah another huge round of applause, because this was amazing.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And again, many thanks for having me here. I really appreciate the invitation to do this. I love to talk about these women. And so having an opportunity to do that is just great.
Lee, quick question.
Sure.
Emily Gay, and
Yes.
that ne'er-do-well husband of hers, did he have any claim to fame as a photographer in Canada?
Oh, yeah. No, that was actually Hannah Maynard and her husband.
No.
Yes.
Emily Gay.
Oh, Emily Gay.
Yeah.
Oh, no, he didn't. He wasn't a photographer in Canada.
No, he didn't, and made no claims to that effect.
No. I mean, he moved to the US and then opened up the studio after he married Emily. And so
Right.
he opened up the studio in Fall River. And then when he, becomes sick, he goes to Florida for treatment for his tuberculosis. And then he goes a little nuts. I don't know. It doesn't say exactly what prompted this, but he shoots his brother, kidnaps the daughter, flees to Canada, but he's only in Canada for a few months before he actually dies. So he's not there long enough again to do any photography.
Lee, I was wondering, I think some artists, painters as well as photographers,
Mhm.
they paint pictures or take photographs in the studio, basically to get some income. But the real passion is the artistic thing. But isn't much of a market for that sometimes. You think that was going on back then with some of these women?
Well, I mean, I think that they're making a living by taking the pictures and selling the cabinet cards, selling the carte de visite. I said they have to master the technology as it changes. So some of them start with the wet plate, glass plates, and then they transition over to the dry plates, and ultimately producing the not the cabinet cards, but the later prints and the little frames with the prints. I think that they were doing what it took to make money. They were doing, some of them actually produce buttons and jewelry. Some of them do paintings. So they will paint the pottery and things like that. I think that if they had a mind to make a living from doing their artistry, if they turned to photography, they were trying to do it with the photography as much as they could, from what we've seen.
I see. Thank you.
Laura just pasted in the link to her article
Oh, great.
into the chat. So I
Yeah.
just pulled up the page. So everyone
Great.
go check that out.
All right, great. Thank you very much,
Anybody
Laura.
Oh, sorry. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, well, it's been, there's one more question from Ellie
Okay.
Russo. On the subject of art, one of the ads mentioned crayon and ink. Were these embellishments?
So sometimes they would be like painted or colorized almost, add a little tint on the cheeks or color in a flower on the photo itself. But the crayon photos were actually drawings. They were more like paintings. They would start with the photograph, but then they would actually create more of a painting or a drawing that looked like the photo. And I had not realized that I actually grew up with one of those. My great grandmother, actually, there was a portrait of her wedding in her wedding outfit. And looking at it nowadays, I look at it and go, oh, I get it. I thought it was like blown up and colorized somehow as a photograph, but it was actually a painting that was done based on the photograph. So they take the photograph and then they'd actually make a drawing, make a painting from it.
A quick
And they would sell
question.
that.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Did you ever track down any women who were photographing during daguerreotype and ambrotype
Yes.
studios?
Yes. Yes, I think there's some information again on the website, but I do have some names of women who did that I might not have profiled yet. As I said, we've got 2,000 names, and I think I've only done 60 podcast episodes, so it's going to take a while. But let me know, but definitely.
Yes, and again, I can paste the information into the end of the chat that I pasted into the beginning of the chat about the links to Lee's work. You just copy that.
Okay.
And please reach out if you have questions.
Yes. Yeah, drop me a line at podcast@p3photographers.net.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Lee, if I may, another question. Does that lab in Greenwich, Connecticut still exist, or anything that it can be connected to that lab? I'm asking purposely because I lived more than 20 years in Stamford, Connecticut, which is right next to Greenwich, Connecticut.
I don't know. The one in Greenwich, I don't know. My husband and I, when we were traveling around a few years ago, we did actually try to track down to see what existed. I mean, the Marston building, the physical building is still there in Lowell, but don't know that it's called Marston. The address probably has changed because I know they renumbered the streets and the buildings. So there were remnants of a lot of these things. So when you go, we will go and try to track down whatever is there. What we haven't done is go to Greenwich, Connecticut to see what the Historical Society knows. That's what we did in Lowell when we were there a few years ago. So we were able to get some information about the streets and the buildings and stuff. So it might be possible, but I don't know. But I'd love to know if it's possible, if you find out.
All right, next time I will be in Stamford. I will check Greenwich as well.
Great,
Yeah.
great. Thank you very much. Let me know.
That can be very soon. It's not just a figure of speech.
Great.
Yeah, I go Stamford sometimes.
Okay, I mean, so that was a big hotel that was a playground for the rich. Apparently, there are stories that I've found online, but I haven't tracked down any photos, that Mrs. J.B. Lewis actually took pictures of the Rockefellers in that, who visited that hotel and went to her studio there. I'd love to track that down too, but I'm still working on that. But she's one of the relatively recent ones that we've run across.
Thank you.
Thanks. Clint, we can't really see what you're holding up there.
It's one of my favorite Hannah Maynard photographs, cabinet cards.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's her.
Oh yeah. Yes,
right?
it is her. It definitely is her.
Is that her husband with her with the beard? I don't know.
That probably is him. I mean, I can't quite see it, but I know that he did have a beard like that. So, so it's probably the two of them.
Look at the rig she's in. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, and
on the wall it says Mrs. R. Maynard, photographic artist and dealer in all kinds of photographic materials, stereoscopic and other views of British Columbia and Vancouver Island for sale.
Yes.
And Mrs. R. Maynard, artist.
Right. So Richard Maynard was her husband's name. He becomes hired by the Canadian government, as I recall, for some Arctic explorations. And that's where he is celebrated. But she sort of fell through the cracks until someone did some research at the Royal BC Archive, I think that's what it's called, in Victoria. And so a woman wrote a book about her and sort of published a lot of her work. It's a great book.
Yeah, her work is pretty obvious. It's brilliant.
Yeah,
just off the street. That's beautiful.
It really, and she does a lot of experimental things with multiple exposures. So the picture that I love is of a tea party, I'll say.
Yeah.
So go to the website, p3photographers.net, look for the tea party picture by Hannah Maynard. It is very clever. It is her having tea with herself.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say. But it's a great picture.
She had a lot of fun with photography, and
she did,
and made a living.
She made a living, and she actually got appointed as the official, taking the pictures for the police. So she took the mugshots and invented a way to take like the profile and full face on one picture, so to save film, to save materials. But she sort of invented that, taking two. So anyway.
Thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful. And Lee, I really appreciate you joining us all the way from San Jose.
Thank you again.
Please come back and join us at our next presentation. Will be October 2nd. John P. Stones is going to present storytelling in photography as Azteca dancers. And that will be October 2nd, 7:30. So if you're new to PHSNE, please sign up on the website so you'll receive all of the emails that will let you know about what's coming up. And at the end of our meetings, we usually just let people chat and socialize. So anyone who wants to hang out for a few minutes, feel free to chat with each other. And Lee, it has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you all again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lee.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Allie.
Had to keep up the Canadian end. There's a few of us here from north of the border. I see.
Hey, Laura.
Especially Laura.
Hi, John Felix.
Laura! Hey.
We need to talk. Huh?
Laura.
Look, she wants to. She doesn't have her microphone on.
She does now, Louise.
Ours is on.
What?
Yeah, I'm really glad that I saw the presentation. I learned a lot. And when I started researching women photographers, I did it by going to archives across Canada and talking to archivists and then looking on the back of photographs. And that was how Hannah Maynard in 1980 was included in an article that I wrote. Was simply the archivists all know across Canada who the women photographers are, but they hadn't been published at all.
Right. So I mean, it's nice to see that they were starting to get published. There are several other ones that I brought across, including the woman who was actually, her life was fictionalized, unfortunately, not in a good way, in BC. I'm just blanking on her name, but you probably know what I'm talking about.
Two women who have been fictionalized.
Mm-hmm.
For the now I can't remember. It's when you put on a play, and so they put on a play about two of the historical women photographers.
Oh, okay.
And it was fun. But I went up and said I learned something and didn't know, and they said, "Oh, we made that up. It was part of our poetic license because we needed to fill it in." They had made a model for the camera that she used, and I had never known what camera she used. But it didn't really quite fit the timeline, but it was a great story anyway.
A nice story. Well, it's good to fill in stuff. Now, I didn't mention that Catherine Bingham and Minnie Libby actually are celebrated in the towns where they were by the historical societies. Someone dresses up as them.
That's wonderful.
Town days. So I actually met the woman who plays Miss Libby in Norway Vane.
That would be really fun.
Yeah, yeah. So it's great that I don't know how many other ones. It's just the ones I happen to run across.
Well, I have about 30 names of women. Well, about 50 names at least of Canadian before 1867.
Oh, wow.
And I have in the article that I just wrote, the archives was still hunting for things, and we're printing glass negatives to find specific photos.
Wow.
And so the article online includes things that came in after I'd already written the article and it was being printed. So it has at least one person who doesn't make it into print.
Wow. Okay, well, that's great. I'm going to check that out after this.
But I actually do have sort of a question for you, if it was okay.
Sure.
I'm interested in Mrs. Fletcher, and I know that I had given Peter Palmquist her name in the 70s sometime, but she learned in Boston. So it seems to me that before she came to Canada in 1841, although we know that she took a steamship from Pictou, Nova Scotia to Boston, and then she went and was listening to a person who had claimed that he learned from Daguerre. So we never have ever been able to find out even her first name.
Okay.
But, and there may be more than one Mrs. Fletcher for all we know.
Yeah.
But she did travel to different cities in Canada at least, and I have about 7 of her ads now. And then she settled in South Carolina. So I wondered whether in Boston, since you see, that's one of the things I'd be very excited if her first name could ever be found. But we do know, even I don't remember off the top of my head what the name of the meeting was or what the daguerreotypist that she went to hear. But I just wondered if there would be lists. Like her husband was a phrenologist and often spoke at Mechanics Institute. But at that particular time where she took the ship by herself, not with her husband, to go to Boston. And she did live near Boston for a period of time, so that there's connections there.
Yeah, well, let's send me an email and we can pick this up offline here, because I want to look and see what we've got. I don't know that we have any more information, but I have some ideas on where we might be able to look.
Yeah, no, it would be really, it's so many people, not just myself, but so many people have tried to find her name and tried to find more things about her. And there's lots of Mrs. Fletchers, some that are sort of despicable people, and others, we could make up anything about her, but we'd like to actually know.
To figure it out. Yeah, that's true. I mean, so that's the other thing, is that there are people, I've seen some of the ancestry, like genealogy shows, where people make connections like, oh, it must be the same thing because it's the same name. But people actually did have the same name, who weren't the same people. So so you need to be careful, but it's fun to try to piece it together. That's the thing.
No, it's fun. And I really liked your enthusiasm for the topic, because I feel that same enthusiasm for the same topic, except I have a different. It was getting to be too big to take on all of North America, so I'm doing it in segments.
Yes. Well, that's my husband and I haven't really been looking at Canada recently because we have been. It's becoming too big. I mean, how Peter Palmquist did everything, I have no idea, and did it without the digital archives. Amazing. He was amazing.
Well, he asked the help of people who were all over the country who were doing little parts too.
That's true.
Yeah. So. And I did have his archives at a certain point, but it wasn't anywhere near. No, it was very small. It was right probably when he was first beginning. It was
you can get access. So I worked. So his archive got donated. So Pam donated it to Yale, and so when I first started working with them to try to access that, it turned out they had a project and they have put his database online. So I have a link on my podcast, on my website. You can get to the Yale archive. It's very bare bones, but you can see if he had any material about the women at all. The material has not been digitized, but at least you'd know if there was anything he'd uncovered that might be there in the archive.
No, I'll look. Is that? No, it's not Yale. I know of another archives, but I can't quite remember. But okay, good. So, thank you.
Sure.
Laura,
yes.
I'm just curious. When you said Mechanics Institute, was there a Mechanics Institute specifically in Boston? I spent many years in Worcester, and the Mechanics Hall started in the 1840s.
Right. That is about the time, because he was a very loudmouthed, I can't think of a more polite way to say it, but he advertised and went around and wrote a book about phrenology, and he spoke at various mechanics institutes.
Okay.
And Mrs. Fletcher, I suspect she actually was taking the daguerreotypes for his practice, because they always almost always advertised together. Like his phrenology ad would be on usually the same page as her daguerreotype ad.
Interesting. The Fletcher's Fletcher is a common name in the
I
city.
know. And his first name is
I'll-
John. That makes it even worse. There's tons of them, you know.
This great stuff. Thanks.
But actually, if you know about, I had never even heard of a Mechanics Institute until I found one in Canada that he had spoken in Nova Scotia. And then their most recent ad was in Toronto in 1842. But they had gone to Quebec first. Well, picked to Nova Scotia first, and then worked their way to Toronto.
I'm going to work back to Lee for just a second. My first role as an editor of the PHSNE Journal was dealing with portraiture and the saga of the and now I'm losing the name. Oh dear, the family from Vermont. John, help me with that.
Stanley?
Say again.
Stanley?
No, the big thing that was in the 2016 journal around. I should. I'm sorry, I've lost the name. I have to go look at it right now. They were a family from Vermont who were all over the northeast quadrant of the United States. And it was the guy from New Jersey who did all the writing on this. Sorry, I'm too full of other stuff.
That's good. That's good.
Right now.
It's a lot of names.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't pull the name. It's right on the tip of my tongue. The family were all became daguerreotypists and then later portrait photographers everywhere from Maine to North Carolina to Illinois and Minnesota. And I wish I could remember, but one of the family members was a woman who took over one of the studios.
Wow.
It wasn't Wing, was it?
Say again?
It wasn't Wing.
No, it was. I'm sorry. I'm so stuffed with other stuff I can't remember. 1 second. I literally can pull the thing.
So I mean, there's Duclos. They're Vermont. They were all over New England and Canada.
Well, while Mike's looking that up, has it been documented a daguerreotype by a woman photographer?
Many.
I've never seen one, I guess what I'm asking.
They haven't, mostly it seems they didn't actually sign them because many daguerreotypists didn't. Sometimes they'll put a little piece of paper underneath the daguerreotype. But I know the names of at least 30 in Canada. Well, Canada hadn't been formed yet, but where Canada would become.
Okay.
And Graham Garrett has about 25 women daguerreotypists in his dictionary of Canadian daguerreotypists. That might not be the right name, but he did the initial research and then taking that and looking for those women. And other people have given me names, and we've seen ads now for about 30 women who were, and some of them may have been actually ambrotypists. You can't always be sure, but they advertised as daguerreotypists.
Yeah, no, my question was though, I mean, I am aware also of a number of women daguerreotypists, but I've never seen a daguerreotype by a woman photographer.
I have that as a goal, but I have not yet seen one.
Yeah, me either.
I think I have seen one. I'm going to have to look and see what I've got from Philadelphia because
there is one that I have seen online, come to think of it, but but because my hunting has only been hunting for the Canadian ones, but I did actually see one. I think it was someone from Scotland because they were claiming that the first woman daguerreotypist was from Scotland. And I think of making any claim of a first, you usually get shot down as soon as somebody else has done more research.
Yeah.
But I think that that they were making that claim and had something to go along with it.
Interesting.
I think
Mike,
historically, I'm
Photographers
sorry,
I
go
was
ahead.
thinking about were the Dunshies.
Oh, Dunchi, sure.
Sure. When one of the women, one of the Met family members was there. I need to jump off, sorry. Thank you very much, Lee. Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome. So I just was asking my husband because I'm thinking there is a daguerreotypist from Philadelphia that we've actually seen, and I'm just blanking on the name. John, I'll send it to you when we figure it
Oh,
out.
I'd love to know.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
actually, there is a daguerreotypist that I've got on my list to research because I have a totally different project, which is Canadian women, well, Canadian daguerreotypists who were Quakers. So there were quite a few.
And this woman was Quaker, and I'm thinking of.
Oh, okay. She is from Philadelphia.
Sally Garrett Hughes.
What is it?
Sally Garrett Hughes. Here, I'll type it in here in the chat.
I don't have my list with me and I can't remember either. But there is a woman, I had decided to only do 5 Quaker daguerreotypists, and then some of them were more interesting what they did later on.
Yeah.
But
so if you look, so I put Sally Garrett Hughes, I just put it in the chat.
Okay, wonderful.
So there is an article that has been written about her by a woman named Sarah Weatherwax, who is the archivist, the photography archivist at the Library Company in Philadelphia. And I'm not sure I ever talked about Sarah Garrett Hughes on my website, and I don't know if I have a link to her article on there, but send me an email and I can send it to you.
Okay.
The information about that article.
No, I'll hunt that up.
But I mean, there is a daguerreotype by Sally Garrett Hughes that they have at the Library Company. And I mean, it's a beautiful daguerreotype, and it is somehow identified by I don't remember now whether it's on the case because it's in a one of those beautiful daguerreotype cases, but somehow it is actually marked as being by Sally Garrett Hughes, and she was a Quaker. So
that's great. Thank you.
Because Quakers wouldn't get their portraits painted, and so many of them, Frances Frith and Gertrude Casimir, and many of them ended up taking up photography. So it's that contradiction that sort of makes me want to explore it. But thank you, that's great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think historically it's the event that there was so not too many female photographers, women photographers, can be explained because as you all know, it was so difficult, so heavy and hard to go outside with all the equipment to take photographs. You have to carry the tent for developing materials. You have to carry the chemicals. You have to carry cameras, tripods, and usually people hired helpers for that. If a photographer wanted to go outdoors to photograph.
Yeah, most of the women were studio, but because there was no patent, and in Canada, it hadn't even formed yet, women were very free. And Daguerre said that ladies would like the daguerreotype. And Snelling, in his 1849 book, he and his wife wrote that book about the history of photography, history of the art of photography. And they talked about women daguerreotypists. and that there was no inhibition at all from women taking it up. Hannah Maynard it's a great picture of her with a huge camera. No, this wasn't daguerreotype, it was a little bit later, being driven down the street with 2 bicycles on a cart, you know? And so they did it gloriously and did it. But there were, of course, there were less of them because it was heavy. So they weren't particularly known for doing outdoor work. But in terms of
yeah, and neither were men. I mean, there weren't a lot of men doing the outdoor work. There were just a handful of those. I mean, not a handful, but so there were proportionally fewer. But Elizabeth Willington, I put the name in the chat. She, again, thanks to Peter Palmquist, he uncovered this great article that she wrote. Now, she was a photographer who actually learned from Matthew Brady in New York City.
Wow.
And then opened up a studio in California. This was the time of wet plate photography. And she loved to take outdoor pictures. So the story about the parasol, if you go to the website, you'll find out that the story about the parasol is a woman had to invest in a sturdy cane-handled white linen parasol to keep the sun off of her, keep the glare off of her camera, and have a way to, like, as she was sliding into the ravines to get the best shot. Right? She was going to balance herself using this parasol. She was phenomenal. She did outdoor photography at a time when a lot of people didn't, because Matthew Brady had to have all those, know, the wagons on the side of the battlefield for a darkroom, and she figured out a way where she didn't need a portable darkroom. She did have a portable dark petticoat that she would put all over her head.
Yeah.
So anyway, so Elizabeth Willington, if you look for Peter Palmquist, she's great. She's great.
If I may jump ahead here a bit, the conversation made me go and grab my Collier's Cyclopedia of Commercial and Social Information, the 1888 edition.
Oh, wow.
And on page 7, towards the back, there's a whole section entitled Photography for Girls.
Oh, wow. What is the name of that book?
Collier's Cyclopedia of Social and Commercial Information. Basically, in one volume, everything you needed to be an American. It's was subtitled "A Treasury of Useful and Entertaining Knowledge," compiled by Nugent Robinson, New York, P.F. Collier, publisher, 1888. I'm just going to read you the first paragraph of the article, which starts. It is difficult to see why photography has not been more taken up by girls, either as a recreation or as a profession, for it seems to be an art for which they are particularly fitted. There are indeed few pursuits which require such rigid attention to cleanliness, delicacy of manipulation, and patience. These things, which are virtues at all times, in photography become positive necessities. And girls are not generally deficient in these qualities. And those who possess the additional requisite of taste may look forward, at any rate, to a fair success in their photography. Without taste, indeed, it is a mere mechanical process, incapable of producing a pleasant picture, except as a result of chance.
That I am so wonderful, pleased that you read that. That's magnificent.
Yeah,
I'm going to try and find it. It's old enough; it might be online in the Gutenberg books.
Oh, true. The Project Gutenberg.
Yeah, I mean, if you try it, or I was about to say, do I dare try to photocopy it? Let's see. Well, let me know if you can't grab it. I'm John Witowitz. I'm in the PHSNE directory somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, give me a call.
Great. I'll let you know.
On that. Yeah.
If I can't find it, yeah, it's great. They're great. There's a collection of like a bibliography of articles by women about women photographers and women doing photography. Again, I keep referencing Peter Palmquist. I have no stake in any of his books either, but it's a great resource. He published so many different things on it. So I'll see if
when did you do that? Because I think I might have that.
Oh, well, he died about 20 years ago. So definitely earlier than 20 years ago. I would say probably in the 70s.
Oh,
he
that might
published that.
be because I know that he added, I did an exhibit and a guest editing of Canadian Women's Studies magazine.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the exhibit went to the Art Gallery of Ontario and the London Regional Art Gallery in Ontario.
Okay.
And so he took all my list and he was adding
okay.
his list.
Okay. Okay.
So that I got a list back, but it was an early list. So I never in all these years have followed up, particularly after he passed away, to find out about a bigger and so much now is online that I feel like I should start all over again. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you don't just start all over again, but as I said, his full list, at least the list when he died, that list is available from the Yale site.
Yeah. And Laura, for me, why and Lee, why the particular interest in photographers who are Quakers?
Because I'm a Quaker.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in the fact that we're not supposed to bring any attention to ourselves, particularly like you don't convert people. So it's a personal thing. And even if you're born a Quaker, you still have to decide yourself whether to be a Quaker. So in those times, in the 1840s, Quakers, it was just very clear. You did good things with your life, but you did not draw attention to yourself to take credit for any of those good things. And you didn't even put your name on your gravestone. So then you
had gravestones?
They had gravestones, but you didn't put your name on it. The name wasn't put on it. The family didn't put the name on it. So why, and there is someone who has written about it a bit, why were so many Quakers early photographers? It was because they were interested in science and they could kind of get around that thing about drawing attention to themselves by having it be an experiment that they were doing.
Right. So Laura, how do we get in touch stay in touch with each other?
Oh, well, I'll give you my email has been hacked, so I can't use it right now. I've got a new email and I'll just type it in here if I can figure out how to do that. Then okay, so let's see. Maybe the chat isn't up there anymore.
Go down to the bottom of your screen, Laura.
Oh, I see.
Okay. The chat.
Okay.
And I just posted a link to the Purdue Palmquist archive, which has a bibliography listed of all of his publications.
Oh, thank you.
I'll just snap that.
Laura, does this mean you're going to have a new email address going forward?
Yes.
Okay. I'll grab it and I'll send it to Bob.
Okay.
All my emails that I send out were going to the trash. It has been.
Oh no.
I didn't even realize that I thought I had no more friends. Nobody was getting back to me. You know. But
simplegoods.photos@gmail.com.
At gmail.com. So I have to write everybody and I'm trying to get it changed.
I'll tell Bob. Did you get our last journal, our most recent journal?
I can still see what people send me, but I can't respond to it. So I've decided on a side thing, my own photographs are touring in the US and they're in Texas right now. And because my email is imprinted on each photo, I can't really change it. But I've been told that I can get emails, but I cannot use it.
Yuck.
So I'm still looking at it, but I'd rather people changed it. Okay. So we can talk to each other another time. We're both from Toronto.
Via Boston tonight.
Oh, you're in Boston?
No. I said we're chatting via Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
No, it's been great hearing everyone share and, get together again. And please look for the archived YouTube link, because the presentation will be on the PHSNE YouTube channel as well, and you can share it with others that way. So
Okay.
that usually takes a week or so, but that's where it will be. And let me see if I can paste that link. Ben, do you have that link handy to the YouTube channel?
Yeah, I'll post it in right now.
Okay, thanks. And that has our past.
We're going to get a, sorry to interrupt, Dana. We're going to get a customized link soon. But for now, it has like some weird characters at the end. But so it's not the most memorable link. But if you copy and paste it, you'll be able to get there.
Great. And I think we started doing this 2 years ago. And in December, John, would it be our third Zoom Christmas party? I think last year was number 2. We would have a get together at the Women's Club in Newton and have coffee and an auction and everything. It was fabulous. But sadly, during the pandemic, we've not sadly, because we've been doing this, which has been wonderful, and people from all over can join. But usually what we do in December is have people share pieces of their collection. People sign up for like a 10-minute slot, and you can share whatever piece of ephemera or camera or project that you have going with everybody else in the group. So please join us for that.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of a two-edged sword. The pandemic really threw us for a loop on the way we had been traditionally meeting, and we don't have that personal interactions, like we used to. But on the other hand, it has opened up a whole new world as far as these programs go, and the number of people who are able to see presentations. And I think we do a lot of good things at PHSNE, but just listening to this conversation the last half hour or so, it reaffirms that as far as implementing our mission, and the transfer of information, and this, I can't think of a better way to do it. I really can't.
I agree with you, John. PHSNE has always been my second favorite photographic historical society. Same thing. We're looking at our third Christmas meeting. We're hoping to try to figure out how to do a hybrid thing. We no longer call it a show and tell. We call it a Zoom and tell. Yeah. Right. We're even looking at investing in maybe some sort of a camera. We need a good internet, because our usual meetings were in a big library, but they would, we'd start at 8 o'clock and they would shut down their internet at 9 o'clock, which kind of left us stuck for the last hour of our presentation. So we've got to sort that out, maybe to a new location. We so miss meeting in person. It's truly bizarre, because some people are a little shy, but they'll come up and say, oh, just look at what I found. Oh, this is the greatest thing. And somebody might actually buy it from them if it's just a ton of fun. But you're absolutely right. We've been really lucky. We get people from Singapore and all over Europe and South Africa, and just it's mind-boggling, especially considering that we're on at 8 o'clock live, and it's like, I don't know, 2 o'clock a week from last Wednesday, wherever they are, and yet they're there. Some of them are a little hungover, especially the ones who tune in from Vienna. Hey, those Germans. Weird. But yeah.
Also, digital divide speaking, you can join on your phone.
Yeah, right?
You can, you can't see everyone necessarily, but you can participate. And I think that's great. That's really important. And we miss the in-person meetings too. And, we miss the coffee pots that are decorated like Kodak. What was it, John? Are they Kodachrome coffee pots?
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
We miss
we're hoping to have some sort of hybrid like that. Most of our members are within the 495 belt, maybe 40, 50-mile radius of
Right.
Boston. So, we're trying to balance that, provide opportunities for people to meet, together physically, but also we certainly don't want to lose the larger audience by having Zoom meetings too. So I think Clint made a good point though. I mean, you have to find the right location where.
Right.
Now,
well, if it turns out though that and we've talked about it at our last executive meeting just on Wednesday night. Conceivably, if we're anticipating like 10 people show up. You do it in my living room, but have the camera running it to Singapore or South Africa or wherever, right? So it's interesting times, bizarre times. Never thought we'd be, and of course, for some of our, aging demographics are more elderly, stalwarts. They can just sit there in their living room and have a cup of coffee, put their feet up, and not even have to wear pants. So, well, I include myself. That's why I haven't stood up for the last 2 hours. So, yeah, good on you. But you guys do an amazing job. I love your shows as well. You project a real air of confidence. You're a really stable group as far as I'm concerned. I always spy on you guys to see what you're doing, and you're welcome to spy on us. Welcome. So
just make sure you put some pants on though, are you?
I know, right? Because this side of the border, you get arrested for that. You free advertising. You can't do that.
Also, if people have suggestions for programs or would like to refer speakers to us, we look for things about New England, but sometimes people come to us from other places and proposals. And like next month, we're talking about photographing Indigenous people.
Wow.
Storytelling Aztec dancers. So, we do present a variety of materials, and we have a whole archive on YouTube that I don't know how many hours it is now.
Zillions, amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
If anybody wants to contact me, I'm at programs@phsne.org. I'll type that into the chat. And any proposals or referrals, feel free to send those my way.
Yeah, just curious. I haven't looked in a while. Is my old YouTube on that?
Speaking.
John.
It's still there, but it's probably still there. But we have 2 separate accounts because we at the time didn't know how to access that one. So
yeah, okay.
We have this PHSNE's virtual meetings, and then there's some like PHSNE archive videos as well. So I'll send the link to yours as well. I think it's yours. I'm gonna send the link.
That would be great.
The thing about that, I did that about 10 or 12 years ago, and it was on how to use the 1930s sheet film camera. And the thing got something like 7,000 hits within a very short period of time. And it turned out the reason for that is that I have exactly the same name as a notorious bank robber. You ever see the movie Dog Day Afternoon? You'll learn what I'm talking about. Exactly the same name. So that's why I was getting.
So the question is, did you change your name to his just to get hits?
No. It's always it just happened. People were looking up that, and that stumbled into me by accident, and there were comments like, "Dude, do you know you have the same name as?" Yes, I do.
There is no such thing as bad publicity. So
that's it. I'm changing my name to King Charles III. I'm good to go.
Okay. He's okay.
There's got to be like at least 3-4 people here who've got to bow down to me now. Oh yes, King Charles.
Well, keep us posted on Canadian events.
Yeah. Your counterpart with our group, Salio Barado, is a recent recruit, and he's just doing amazing stuff. He's very well connected with folks in Europe. We did a symposium last April as sort of part of the program, and we had speakers. Oh gosh. 2 panels, with each panel with a moderator with 4 speakers, and people from everywhere. And it's quite remarkable. I mean, we did it on a Friday afternoon, and this was like, I don't know, midnight in Iceland or something like that. I don't know. And yet we had a lot of people tuning in. It was remarkable. It was great. We couldn't have done it without the changing times. Never would have worked. Had to fly no one in, although it seemed that we did have a suspiciously enough some sort of a beer budget. Well, maybe that was just me. Anyway, entertainment. So yeah, he's. I'll have him keep an eye on what you're doing, Dana, because I've always loved your stuff.
It takes a village,
Without a doubt. Some of our execs are here tonight, and they're the ones who, keep the village going, keep the village growing.
I just posted into the chat, there's an exhibit coming up at PBDSX where I am presently, called Power and Perspective, Early Photography in China. I don't know if there are any women photographers featured, but I will take a look into that, Lee. And if we just got the catalog at the library, so I'll do some looking. It's a great.
Wow. Great. Yeah, I'm fascinated by all of this information, and thank you all so much for sharing. I did find the reference to that article about Sally Garrett Hughes. So I posted in the Garian, I hope I spelled the Garian right, annual, so 2002, 2003.
Searching that right now. Okay, well, we have gone way over, but it has been great. And I just want to thank everyone for participating in the conversation. Laura, I have to read that article the minute we get off.
Yeah, me too. Me too, I got to check it out.
So thanks everyone again, and see you next month.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lee.
Bye.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night. All right, bye now.
Bye.